Hello everybody. Today is kind of a special edition of a never before seen edition of my vlogging videos. We can call it Story Time with Professor Costa. So I've been talking and I've been reading about a lot of books on critical race theory, critical theory in general, gender studies, fat studies. And I've been starting to understand this whole concept and what the ideas they are pushing and what's their goal. But today's story that I'm going to tell is more concerning the dangerousness of these new policies that they are pushing. For example, of kids being able to go through transition surgeries to change sex without the permission of their parents, which I think is very dangerous and could lead to a lot of problems for these children later on in their adult lives. So I'm going to tell you a story about one of them, taken out of the book called The Madness of Crowds by Douglas Murray, a very popular author from England. And you could look up some interviews with him, a lot of interviews available. He's a great public and societal commentary that he does, a lot of those videos, those interviews I mean, sorry. So let me tell you about this story. One man's young story. Naturally, this is a sensitive subject, and for that reason I am going to change the name of the person I am about to describe. Let us call him James, but the person is real. His case is not uncommon, and he is the sort of person whose story at least be in the mix in the societal discussion now underway. Now in his 20s, James was born and brought up in the UK. In his mid-teens, he found himself attracted to the gay scene and to the drag scene in particular. He had a lot of gay friends, and from the age of about 16, began to spend a lot of time in drag clubs. He liked the people, he liked the scene and its closeness. The people he found there seemed to him almost like a lost generation of people who huddled together in this world because they were worried their parents would disown them if they knew they were gay or liked doing drag. As a result, these people didn't just have fun together, they became like a family. Eventually, James himself started doing a bit of drag. Around this time, he also became very close friends with someone in their early 20s who had transitioned from male to female. A person who seemed to James to be completely fabulous. At around the age of 18, James went to his family doctor and plucked up the courage to tell him, "I think I'm in the wrong body. I think I might be a woman." For the year and a half or so after this, he started traveling around seeing different doctors, trying to find one who had a better sense than his family doctor had about what he was actually going through. Finally, at the age of 19, he got a referral to a psychosexual service in Manchester and sat for 3.5 hours of psychoanalysis. He was asked about his sex life, his relationship with his parents, and much more. In fact, he was slightly taken aback by how intimate the questions were. But the counselor's conclusion in Manchester was clear. "You're trans," he was told. And so he was referred to the Gender Identity Clinic at Charing Cross in London. The waiting room there was so colorful, with everyone from the very feminine to Bob the Builder in a wig. 6 months later, a workshop of around 20 of them were brought together. The consultant gave them the National Health Service's best understanding of what had brought them to that room. They were told, as Dr. Benjamin had told Morris, an earlier reference to earlier in the book, "We know it is a problem with the brain. We can't operate on the brain, so we do our best to make the body match the brain." And this then became the NHS's role in dealing with the case of James and others. To be clear, the NHS is the health system in England. 6 months after that workshop, he had his first one-on-one interview, which went into considerable detail. There were questions about relationships and work. The all-around stability of the person was obviously important. James saw endocrinologists and had a testosterone reading. The fact that the reading was low on one occasion, in fact it varied at other readings, was taken as proof that there was indeed a trans issue that needed addressing. Looking back, James is struck by a number of things. One is that he was never offered any counseling. How he said he thought the left he felt was just accepted. And there were another thing. It was all a bit too nice, he says now. There was never any pressure, never any grilling. 2 years of living as a member of the opposite sex is taken as proof that the person can go on to the next stage. And since the NHS meetings were all 6 months apart, James came up to his 2-year mark after only a few of them. At this stage, the issue of hormone replacement therapy came up. And James says, if you're patient and play the game, it's ridiculously easy to get hormones. You just turn up twice a year and wait. And of course, people in the groups as well as friends on the scene swap stories of how to get to this next stage. James went on estrogen. I don't know how to pronounce that word, sorry. Which included daily doses as well as injections. Accounts from him and from others about the nature of this process hits, among much else, right at the heart of claims that there are no essential differences between the sexes. Indeed, in any other context, the descriptions of the effects of estrogen on the male body would be considered widely sexist. James's experience was much like that of others who start taking estrogen and anti-androgens, testosterone blockers. Among the things that happened was that he became more emotional than he had been before. I cried a lot. His skin began to soften and his body fat began to redistribute. But he noticed other things. The movies and even the music he liked began to change, as did what he liked in bed. James took the estrogen for more than a year. He had been a late developer, and there was speculation over whether he had in fact still got a small amount of puberty to go through when he had begun taking hormones. He also had 2 meetings, one by Skype and one in person, about the possibility of moving to the next stage. He knew that the backlog of cases meant the NHS couldn't be hurried to this part of the process, but he says that he raised with them the possibility of going for private treatment abroad for gender reassignment surgery. A place in Marbella on the Costa del Sol had been recommended by a number of people, and he says that the NHS neither tried to endorse nor stop him when he mentioned that he was thinking of taking this route. He got information on the costs of procedures, drugs, and even flights. Excuse me. I came very close to doing it, he says. I am very glad now that I didn't. Even during the time that he had been on hormones and had been looking to going to the next stage of transitioning, a number of things had begun to preoccupy him. So far, James had only really read one side of the argument. His friends on the trans scene had shown him a path down which he might go too. And the NHS had not seriously questioned the wisdom of his going down this path. They had treated him as someone with a condition that needed fixing. But online, James sought and found contrary points of view. Through alternative media, he discovered YouTube stars and others who were questioning the wisdom of his decision, including younger and hipper people than he had expected. He was also struggling with his faith. Brought up as a liberal Christian, he went around and around questions of God and design. On one hand, if God doesn't exist, then my body isn't designed. But he also came to think that people who said that they had been born in the wrong body took a very egocentric view of things, as though this was a challenge that had been given to them. If the whole universe was a coincidence, why do so much drastically for the sake of changing myself? He began to wonder whether the answer to some of his questions didn't lie in psychology rather than surgery. Specifically, he began to look at what I need to do to be content with my body, not change my body. Of all the consultants he had spoken to, none had engaged him in questions like these. I was never encouraged to look into it deeply. There was something else which made James begin to wonder whether this was really something that he wanted. As he and others in his circle were well aware, anyone who takes hormones for a period of years will eventually notice effects which are irreversible. These happen after around 2 years of anti-androgen treatment. And as James approached his second year on androgens, he began to feel nervous. The NHS had no emergency opponents for him to consult with a doctor because they were so overwhelmed with people coming to them to consult on gender reassignment. He would have to wait another 6 months, but James felt he couldn't wait that long. He faced not only physical changes that risked becoming permanent, but also biological facts. After more than 2 years on androgens, most men will become infertile and so incapable of ever being able to father a child. James was wondering not only whether he really wanted to become a woman, but also whether he might not one day want to be a father. He had a boyfriend, and his boyfriend was not convinced that James was actually a woman. His boyfriend just thought that James was gay like him. James himself felt that the hormones were bringing him to the point of being permanent. And so, after considering all these things, unilaterally, and without any support or advice from the doctors who had put him on the hormones, James decided to come off them. He described coming off them as very intense. The changes it brought about were much more severe than when he started on the hormones. He suffered terrible mood swings. And while taking estrogen made him cry more and change his taste in movies, when testosterone came back into his body, it had an equally sexist set of effects. He noticed a lot of common behaviors. He became more angry, more aggressive, and yes, far more horny. Today, he has been off hormones for more than 2 years. But the effects of his time transitioning across the sexes is still with him. He thinks he may be just all right, but he may also be permanently sterile. More immediate is the fact that he still has breasts, or what he refers to as breast tissue. When asked about this, he shyly pulls aside one side of the top of his t-shirt, where a strap is visible. It is a compression vest that he wears all the times in order to try to hide the fact that he has this breast tissue. His clothes are noticeably baggy, and he obviously avoids anything that might be figure hugging. He thinks he will probably have to have surgery to remove the remaining breast tissue. With some of the perspective afforded by time, he is able to think about his changes over recent years. I do believe transgenderism exists, he says. The sheer volume of people who are moving in this direction at the moment is one thing that suggests this to him. But he says the whole area hasn't been looked at or thought about with nearly enough rigor. The whole idea remains fixed on things, as he puts it like, so you don't like rugby? Interesting. When he told the psychoanalyst in Manchester that he didn't get on with all the boys in his primary school, the response was, he says, aha! As it was when he told him that as a boy he sometimes dressed in his sister's Pocahontas dress. I've always thought it was curious that the NHS didn't look at wider options, he says, and from the moment that he went to consult the experts, he felt like I was on a conveyor belt. The NHS was overstretched, with only 2 doctors in the UK doing gender reassignment surgery. 1 full-time, 1 part-time. But the doctors were always promising that with around 3,000 people already in treatment and another 5,000 reportedly on the waiting list in the UK, the NHS was busily training up lots more people to deal with the demand. Maybe some patients will hesitate, as James did, when the conveyor belt brings them up to the point of surgery. Maybe some patients will hesitate, as James did, when the conveyor belt brings them up to the point of surgery. But even then, as James' baggy clothes attest, the process is not in any way cost-free. James is gay, very gay, as he puts it on stage. And he feels that he has always been a bit of a social chameleon. Probably the people I was spending time with had an effect, but he says, I don't want to be one of those people who says that trans makes more trans. It is too close, in his opinion, to the old claim that gay people cause more gay people. But there is something in it, he adds. The thing of my really cool trans friends. He is confused, like everyone else, about what trans may or may not be. If anything, we just need to know more, he says. For instance, why is it the case that suicide rates don't change between pre and post-up trans? We're running too quickly, he says. It's like a knee-jerk. We're terrified of being on the wrong side of history. But he knows it could have been worse. Looking back at how close he came to surgery, James reflects. I dread to think what position I'd be in now. I don't know if I would be here now. Listening to James's story, which resembles those of many others, one of the things that stands out is how much we pretend to know, but how little we know. How fast we appear to be landing on solutions to questions we haven't answered yet. But another thing that stands out is the way in which trans just keeps invading so many of other controversy-laden subjects of our time. Gay rights campaigners have argued for years that anybody can be gay and that the historical view of gay people being effeminate men and masculine women is not just outmoded and ignorant, but prejudiced and homophobic. And then along comes another rights claim, which is so close that it even gets to share an acronym with gay. But this one suggests something infinitely more undermining than the idea that certain behavioral characteristics are typical of gay people. The trans claim keeps suggesting that people who are slightly effeminate or don't like the right sports or are not merely gay but potentially inhabiting the wrong body and are in fact men or women inside. Given the number of connotations, it is surprising that so few gay men and women have objected to some of the claims that have become embedded in the trans movement. Gay groups have generally agreed that trans rights exist within their orbit, forming part of the same continuum and acronym. Yet, many of the claims made by trans do not simply run in contravention to the claims of the gay movement. They profoundly undermine them. Some people are gay, or possibly trans, or the other way around. Get over it, they say. So basically, and there's many others, and I also recommend on this subject the book by Abigail Schreier named Irreversible Damage, especially to parents of young girls, because that's the audience that she based her book on, is the dangers of these ideologies being pushed on young kids. With more, you know how kids are influenceable by peer pressure, or by the peers around them. It could become very dangerous if this becomes a trend. We can see how naive and innocent children are with the Tide Pod challenge, where the kids were eating Tide Pod challenges because other kids were challenging them to do it. So how is it far-fetched to say that if more kids, because of the schooling that they're getting or the parenting that they're getting at home, are inclined to think because they like boys like playing with a doll or girls like playing with a truck, that it is very simple and that they're just plainly trans. That is not true. And there are many stories, especially in that book I just quoted, and a few in this book that I just read from, that explain to you stories of people that have gone through this and that say themselves how dangerous this could be for children. And that this is a life-changing decision that must be discussed with parents and not taken lightly. So guys, that was my story today from Storytelling with Professor Costa. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys look into this because these are very important subjects. All right, peace out, have a good day, and hope to see you soon.